Yeah, so the current distribution process sucks.
Completely broken. Broken.
Pretty broken.
Broken, and it's antiquated.
Challenged?
Incredibly challenged at the moment.
It's very jumbled. I think it's very difficult.
It's messy and it's got to change.
One of the challenges we've got around feature film and TV is the way in which there's a premium placed on exclusivity.
It can be a little bit tough to get distribution in Australia.
We haven't really caught up with the needs of the consumer.
As good as it is to have government support, it's fantastic. The fact that this government support is tied to the requirement of a theatrical distribution is causing some massive problems. I think is pretty well known.
The rules that we have in place for our public funding really aren't really appropriate anymore. We've got to look at the idea of forcing films into theatrical release may not be the best way of servicing the audiences, the public, or the use of public money.
You've got to get that letter of interest from the distributor to get the government funding, and you're tied at the hands of the companies that feed you, and which is very, very frustrating for many, many filmmakers with lots of lovely stories out there.
We're really restricted because our funding makes us have to go with a distributor before we get finance. So that is a big problem in that we don't have many distributors that want to take up Australian films anymore.
It's hard for smaller distributors to get access to screens. It's hard for, when they do, for them to hold screens. And, we've been talking a lot during the conference about the difficulties of windowing and trying to adjust that and the push-pull between the exhibitors and distributors.
The pipeline's quite controlled with the exhibitors. Distributors can't distribute if they can't get the screens, and exhibitors' income comes from American product, basically.
I think we've got some good distributors. I think we face a problem in terms of getting access to screens, and so the actual opportunity for us to make money from feature films is extremely challenging.
We produce somewhere around 30 feature films, and we classify like 29 of them as failures because they didn't do well in the traditional system through this broken model, where it's measured in many ways in the screen averages of the first week of that film's release, which is the way the blockbusters are measured, and that's just not an accurate measure.
Mao's Last Dancer, Tomorrow When the War Began, and Brand New Day, all of these films returned zero money back to the film's investors. So I look at that and I say, there is something really wrong.
I mean, if you look at the success of those films down the track on all the other platforms, they can often do really, really well across all the other platforms, but in that first week they're classified a success or a failure.
Lucas and Steven Spielberg at a conference said, the movie business is melting down, the film theatre is dying, Lincoln barely got into theatres. So you're talking about Lucas and Spielberg being unable to get their movies into theatres. And we've got this kind of obsession with our films need to be in cinemas.
Theatrical for Australian films, it's just a big ask these days, like to get people to the cinema to see Australian films. I think it's still worth getting there, but I think it's a good launching pad for getting the film's publicity for the DVD release.
Australian distributors know how to market an art house film for, say, women over 40. They're still going to the cinemas, art house cinemas anyway, but they don't know how to market it to under 40-year-olds.
There's a strong audience in Australia for Australian content, as demonstrated by the popularity of Australian programs on television, but that audience is lost or disconnected to Australian theatrical distribution.
Australian films get drowned out, when competing against an Iron Man 3 or something like that, which will have billboards, online ads, television ads. It'll be inescapable when it's on.
Until we get a system that can actually help Australians get their films to the Australian market in smaller and micro-budget ways, and I'm saying the distribution model that fits the actual financial model of the country, which means smaller films to smaller markets, and building those niche markets into a mass market, I think that we're going to be still struggling. So, we just need to find new ways to do that.
Film and television places a premium on exclusivity, which enables you to get some money from distributors and broadcasters up front, and that's a really good thing because it lessens the risk and it lessens the risk on the producer and it shares it more broadly. In a sort of a non-exclusive wide online release world, you're getting less money coming in at the start, but you're certainly opening up a range of exploitation opportunities and additional sort of revenue opportunities that you might be able to tap into. But the challenge there is that there's not a lot of commissioning that's going on in that space.
I mean, I guess the conversation has actually already started, but we need to sort of seriously sit down and come up with some ways that we might address the very dramatically changing nature of that distribution process that worked for a model that survived for a number of years, but no longer is perhaps appropriate for all of the kinds of films that we're making.
From seeing the trends in America, a lot of the sales and distribution for genre films happens online and through DVD sales.
I think a lot of people now are finding their content online, they're finding their content in other places, and they want to be able to see what they want when they want, and they're getting used to having that privilege.
I think there's a lot of room for innovative means of distribution. Some of those are ones that we've explored that went really well, which includes, I guess, event distribution and also building up fan bases before your movie comes out, so you're not relying on the sort of old world means of PR and marketing alone.
When the shift from carriage travel went to motor cars, pretty much all the old players died out because they didn't think they needed to put a motor and a steering system in a carriage and make a motor car, which is all early motor cars were. So it was down to young innovators like the Chrysler brothers and Henry Ford. We're in a similar paradigm shift at the moment, except there's some big institutional players, big broadcasters, big production companies, big studios, but it's all in turmoil. At the end of the day, it didn't really matter what the vehicle was. A passenger wanted to get from A to B, and they went on the best vehicle available. It's the same now. People are telling stories, people want to listen to stories, watch stories. That hasn't changed, it'll never change. But the mediums are changing, and they're changing dramatically.
The huge challenge for us now is to work out what will make people want to pay for content. And it's critical. It's critical to the business model. It's critical to us as producers because we rely on the distributors. In many cases, companies who build a business around this, but we also rely on ourselves as distributors of our own content to find ways to monetize. Otherwise, we'll have no basis from which to make content going forward. So that's the elephant in the room. Sure, content is king, and sure, there will always be a place for great content with audiences, but who is going to pay for that content?
Confidence.